This is lecture over chapter 1 on the human body. It's an orientation to this course in anatomy and physiology. Why would a chapter matter to a student? This is always at the beginning of every chapter. The author of the book has a medical background. She's formerly trained as a nurse and is also an educator. And has expertise in human anatomy and physiology. So the why it matters in the book is always within the health science field. And in this case, the chapter is going to be doing a lot of basic anatomy terminology and introducing us to a course in anatomy. So why does this chapter matter? Is because understanding anatomical terminology allows you to communicate accurately with your colleagues in the health sciences. Looking at the first section of the chapter is titled Form and Function of Anatomy and Physiology. The learning outcomes for this section is to define anatomy and physiology and describe their subdivisions and to explain the principle of complementarity. So, what is anatomy? Anatomy is basically the study of structure of body parts and their relationships to one another. And physiology is the study of the function of the body parts, how they work, okay, and carry out life-sustaining activities. So basically, anatomy and physiology is the study of structure and function. So there are some subdivisions of anatomy. One subdivision is gross anatomy. It's also macroscopic anatomy. And here, you're able to study large visible structures with the naked eye. You don't need any special instruments like microscopes to do this. And we can study anatomy in different ways. One is by regional anatomy. And here you would look at all the structures in a particular area of the body. For example, you might study the anatomy of the head of the human body. So you'd be studying things like the skull and the brain and the muscles that you might find in the head, for example. And then there is system anatomy, and here you would look at systems instead. And examples might be the cardiovascular system, or the nervous system, or the muscular system. Is another way that you can arrange your study in anatomy. In fact, that's the way this course and your textbook is arranged. We're going to be looking at a systems approach to anatomy. And then there's surface anatomy. And in surface anatomy, you're going to look at internal structures as they relate to the overlying skin. For example, visible muscle masses or veins seen at the surface. And then there is microscopic anatomy, and this deals with structures you can't see with the naked eye. One area is cytology, and that's the microscopic study of cells. And then there's histology, which is the study of tissues. So tissues are made of cells, and we study that at the microscopic level. And then there's another area of anatomy called developmental anatomy. And in this case, you're going to study anatomical and physiological development throughout life. So you would start early on in embryonic development, and then you can go all the way through childhood, adolescence, adult, and senescence or old age. Embryology, for example, is a study of the development before birth. So in embryology, you would be studying the development of the embryo or fetus. And to study anatomy, one must know your anatomical terminology and be able to observe, manipulate, palpate, and auscultate. Auscultate means to hear, like if you're listening, for example, to the heart within the chest cavity. And then we have subdivisions of physiology. And when you study physiology, you might look at organ systems as well. So you might look at the renal system, which is the function of the urinary system, or the cardiovascular. And you're going to be looking at the physiology of those systems. And when you're doing the study, you're often going to be, because you're looking at physiology, you're often looking at at the cellular and molecular level, at the molecules that make up the cells, because the functioning of the cells within those organs that are found within those organ systems are responsible for the functioning of that system. So that requires some knowledge of cell biology and chemistry to fully understand the physiology. And so if you're going to study physiology here, it's going to require some knowledge of physical principles like the physical sciences. So you're going to need to know a little bit about electricity, pressure, and movement. And you're also going to need to know some chemistry and chemical principles to adequately study physiology. So the very next chapter we're going to be covering, we're actually going to be covering some chemistry in there. And then there's complementarity of structure and function. And that's to say that basically structure and function can't be separated. If you're going to understand how structure functions, then you need to know the anatomy. The anatomy basically can explain why structure functions the way it does. And this is true at every level, from molecules and the structure of molecules all the way to entire larger structures and organs. The way they're structured can explain their functions. So in other words, function always is going to reflect the structure. And what a structure can do is going to depend on the specific form. And an example here is with the teeth that you have here. These front teeth, your incisors, are used for shearing or cutting, like when you bite off a piece of carrot. And then once you get to chewing on that carrot, you break it down into smaller pieces. Eventually, you move that to your back teeth or your molars, which are for grinding food. So the structure of those teeth fit their purpose or their function. So their form fits function here. So overall, this idea is known as the principle of complementarity of structure and function. And at the end of this section, there are a couple of multiple choice questions that you should think about and try to answer. The first question here says, which of the following requires magnification to study? Is it A, gross anatomy, B, regional anatomy, C, surface anatomy, or D, histology? The next question is, this branch of anatomy is going to trace structural changes that occur in the body throughout lifespan, and it's referred to as, and so what branch does this? Is it A, regional anatomy? Is it B, developmental anatomy? Is it C, microscopic anatomy, or D, surface anatomy? So now we're going to move on to section 2 of chapter 1, and this one is titled Structural Organization. Our learning outcomes for this section include name the different levels of structural organization that make up the human body and explain their relationships. And the second objective is a brief survey of 11 organ systems of the body. So we're going to identify 11 organ systems and their components, so organs and structures that make up the system. And you're going to briefly explain their major functions for each of the systems. So when we talk about levels of organization, in biology in general, you'll be starting at the smallest level. For biology anyway. Physics, you can go smaller, but the smallest level of organization would be atoms, and you can see atoms pictured there on the right. And atoms make molecules, and molecules can make organelles. We're going to call this altogether the chemical level there. And if you get a whole bunch of organelles, which are tiny structures found within cells, and you put them together, now you're at the cellular level. So in the image to the right here, you can see there is one cell there. It looks like a smooth muscle cell. And that would be the cellular level. Now, we get a whole bunch of similar cells and put them together. They're going to have a certain function. We're going to call that the tissue level here. So here you can see smooth muscle tissue there. And then 2 or more tissues are going to come together to form the organ. So we'll call that the organ level here. And in this case, in the diagram here, you see a blood vessel. And blood vessels, like arteries, will have smooth muscle, but they're going to have other tissues in there as well. They'll have epithelial tissues and connective tissues all together, which come together to form the organ of a blood vessel. And then if you get several organs that work closely together, then you're going to have an organ system, like the cardiovascular system, which includes blood vessels and the heart. And then you're going to have all of the organ systems, not just the cardiovascular, skeletal, muscle, etc. Those are going to come together and form the entire organism. So that's the organismal level there. And in biology, you can actually go higher, but for our study in anatomy and physiology, these are the levels that we'll focus on mostly. If we were studying at higher levels, we might study several of the same kind of organism, and that would be population, and then many populations of different living things would be communities, and then communities go to ecosystems, which include the non-living, and then you get the biosphere. But here we're going to focus on these levels here. And the one thing about these levels of organization is that when you look at a certain level of organization, and then you look at the next lowest level, the parts that make them up, for example, if we look at molecules here in this diagram, and the molecules are made of different kinds of atoms and their compounds and so on. And if we were to look at the separate atoms that make them up, and we look at the properties of those atoms, and then you tried to make a prediction on what the result would be if we put them together, it's almost impossible, because when you put the parts together, you get entirely new functions you cannot predict, and they call that overall in biology principle of emergent properties. And I'll give you an example. The salt that you put on your food, table salt, is made of the element sodium and another element, chlorine, and so it's called sodium chloride. Now, sodium, pure sodium, if you put it in water, it's highly reactive and it can explode. That seems pretty dangerous. And chlorine, if you have pure chlorine, it's a gas at room temperature. That's very toxic. So explosive and toxic, and if you put those two together, it seems that if you add the sum of those two things, you're going to get something that's really, really dangerous. Yet when you put them together to make the compound sodium chloride, you put it on your food. So you wouldn't predict that from the parts. So we call this emergent property, and that's true at every level. The next highest level is more than the sum of the parts from the lower level on there. So again, that's called emergent properties. So now we're going to look at the 11 organ systems overall, and according to the objectives, we need to know some of the basic structures found within their organs and so on, and some of the basic functions of these systems. The first system we're going to look at is the integumentary system here, and this includes the skin. So the skin and some of the accessory structures like hair and nails are all part of the integumentary system. And the function here is going to form an external body covering, basically protecting deeper tissues from injury. The skin also helps synthesize vitamin D, which is important for your bone health, for calcium metabolism. And it also is a location where we have many kinds of receptors for sensing things like pain and pressure. And we also have sweat glands and oil glands, which are also have important functions in your integumentary system. The next organ system we're going to look at is the skeletal system, which is the bones. And some basic organs include bones in general and joints. So those are some of the major structures of the skeletal system. And the function for the skeletal system here protects and supports the body organs and provides a framework for the muscles to pull on to cause movement. A common thing the students will answer when I ask, what is the function of the skeletal system? They say it's for movement. That's not completely correct. Muscles are what cause movement. The skeleton provides levers on which the muscles can act on to help create that movement. So you got to really be careful in how you describe that as a function. Bones are also within the bones. This is where blood cells are created within the bone marrow. Red bone marrow is where blood cells are created. So your skeletal system is responsible for producing blood, and your bones will also store minerals like calcium for use by other systems. Your nervous system and your muscle system, for example, require calcium for the cells to function properly. Next organ system we're going to look at is the muscular system. And if you ask what is an organ of the muscular system, you just say it's a skeletal muscle. You don't have to give a specific muscle, like a bicep or anything like that. And the function of the muscle system is to allow for manipulation of the environment, allow for locomotion, and for facial expressions. So some of the muscles in your face will pull on the skin and allow those expressions. Your muscle system also helps you maintain posture, and if you get cold, shivering can help produce heat. The next system is the nervous system, and a major organ there is the brain. The spinal cord is another structure there, and then these structures that leave the brain and the spinal cord are called nerves. So those are some major structures of the nervous system. And the function here is really about communication and really fast communication and direct. So it's fast acting control system of the body. The system responds to internal and external changes, or we might refer to those as stimulus or stimuli. And the nervous system will provide a response, and the response might be to act on either muscles and get them to contract, or on glands to get the glands to release hormones. Now we have the endocrine system, and there you see there's many different structures, some of the basic structures there. Several of these main structures of the endocrine are glands. Up in the brain we have the pineal gland and the master gland called the pituitary gland. Then there's the thyroid gland in the neck area, and then the thymus in the thoracic area there. And then right above the kidneys we have the adrenal glands, right above the renal organs or the kidneys. And then just below the stomach here, we're going to have the pancreas, which is also an endocrine gland. And then the sex organs, the ovaries and the testes also serve as glands. The ovaries would produce estrogen and the testes produce testosterone. And overall, these structures produce chemicals called hormones. So they secrete hormones, and hormones are going to be involved in regulating processes such as growth and development, reproduction, and the use of nutrients and your metabolism. So there's an entire chapter on the endocrine system, and it's usually it's the first chapter of the second semester of anatomy and physiology. Then we have the cardiovascular system here, and cardio is heart, right? And the vascular is reference to the blood vessels, which include arteries and veins. Arteries are typically going to be colored red and veins blue, but there are some exceptions. So what are the functions of the cardiovascular system? The blood vessels are going to transport blood, and the blood is a medium that's going to carry materials needed by the body and carry away waste products. So one thing needed is oxygen. We carry oxygen to your tissues, the cells of those tissues. And we're going to carry the waste product, carbon dioxide, away so that we can exhale it into lungs. The blood also carries nutrients and wastes. And the heart is the motor for this. So the heart is what's going to pump that blood and circulate it around. And then we have sort of a combination of two systems. Here's the lymphatic system and the immune system, where immunity is closely connected to the lymphatic system. And the lymphatic system is going to have a whole other set of blood vessels, not blood vessels, but lymphatic vessels there. So they've drawn a few here within the body. These are some of the major or main vessels, lymphatic vessels. One of them, for example, is called the thoracic duct, but overall you just call it lymphatic vessels. And then there's lymph nodes, and lymph nodes are structures that serve as filters within those lymphatic vessels. The thymus also has some immune function, and the red bone marrow is responsible for producing white cells, which are involved in the immune system. And then we have the spleen, which is another structure of the lymphatic system and immunity. So what are the major functions of the lymphatic system? Well, the lymph vessels are going to pick up fluid that's leaked out from your blood vessels. When the blood reaches your tissues there, fluid does leak out, and it's got to get back into the blood vessels on its way out from the organs that are being served by the blood. And the blood vessels will pick up about 85% of that fluid that has leaked out of your blood. So you got 15% remaining in there. That 15% gets back into the blood through the lymph vessels. So the lymph vessels will pick up the rest. And if there's any problems with that, then you would get edema or swelling in the parts where the lymph vessels are not doing enough of a job to get the fluid back. So the lymphatic system is a major function to help return that. Now, when that fluid is returning back, that fluid passes through these lymph nodes here, and those lymph nodes are going to serve as a sort of a filter to help pick up any debris and any pathogens that may be in that fluid. And in those lymph nodes, you're going to have white cells, blood cells called lymphocytes, that are involved in the immunity. So there's your connection to the immune system. And the immune response would help provide an attack against any foreign substances, like bacteria, for example. The next system is the respiratory system, which involves breathing or taking air in and out. And some of the major structures here include up in the head, you have the nasal cavity, the pharynx, which is the back of the throat, and the larynx here, where you find the opening to your windpipe or the trachea. And then that trachea will branch into bronchi, which are the branches. Bronchus is singular. And then you have your right and your left lungs. Okay, so the function here for the respiratory system is to keep blood constantly supplied with oxygen, and it also helps remove carbon dioxide. So your cells will take the oxygen and then use the oxygen and create carbon dioxide, and then the carbon dioxide comes back through the blood vessels up to the lungs so that we can exhale out the carbon dioxide. And there's going to be special sacs in the lungs that are called alveoli, and those are found in the lungs where the actual site of gas exchange, oxygen for carbon dioxide, will take place. The next system is the digestive system, and in the digestive system, the major structures there include the oral cavity, where we put our food and chew it, and then you swallow, goes down the esophagus. From the esophagus, that leads to the stomach, and then from there, the stomach, as the stomach begins that digestion, then food will be released into the small intestine, where you absorb your nutrients, and then the large intestine, and then from the large intestine to the rectum, and then anything not absorbed would be eliminated as waste out of the anus. So what is the functions of the digestive system? They're going to break down food, which is digestion, and then absorb units, these smaller units of food or nutrient molecules. And they're going to enter the blood and then be distributed to all of your body cells, and any indigested foods are going to end up eliminated as feces. Then we have the urinary system, and a major organ of the urinary system is the kidney, where urine is formed. Basically, the kidneys are going to filter out blood, waste products, was one of the functions there. And then once the urine is produced, then it'll travel down the ureters, which are these tubes, to your urinary bladder, where the urine will be stored until you eliminate it. And the urine will be eliminated through the urethra. So the function of the urinary system is to help get rid of nitrogenous wastes, which are produced during your metabolism within your cells. The kidneys also help function in balancing or regulating water and electrolytes like sodium and potassium, and also helps in pH balance or acid-base balance in your blood. So they also serve a role in helping to control your pH of your body fluids. And the final system we're going to look at is the reproductive system. And the first system we'll look at as far as structure goes is the male reproductive system. Here, the major organ of the reproductive system is where the sex cells are produced and sex hormones, and that's the testes. All the other structures are sort of accessory. They include the penis, the scrotum, prostate, and ductus deferens that you see here in the image. But overall, what is the function of a reproductive system? And then we'll look at the male reproductive system. The function is for producing offspring. And the testes are going to be the location where sperm and male sex hormones are produced. And the male ducts and glands aid in the delivery of sperm to the female reproductive tract. The rest of this description here in the caption is for female. So we'll move to the next one. Again, the same function is about production of offspring here. I'm going to skip down here to the ovaries. Those ovaries are the major organ where the eggs are produced in female hormone. So that's the ovary. Other structures include the uterine tubes, the uterus, and the birth canal or vagina. And then you also have mammary glands as well. So what are the ovaries? Those are going to be what produces the eggs and female sex hormone, estrogen. The remaining female structures serve as a site for fertilization and development of the fetus. The mammary glands of the female breast are going to produce milk to help nourish your newborns. So that's the end of section 2, and so here are a few multiple choice questions to consider. The first question is to select the option that shows increasing complexity of levels. So in this one, you're going to want to look at the lowest level or simplest level, and then what is the highest level of complexity. So you want to look at those choices there and pick the one that goes from the smallest or lowest level to simpler level to the higher, more complex level there. So it looks like they have cells, cell level, tissue, organ, and organ system arranged in various orders. So you would want to go and choose whatever the right choice is that gets those in order from lowest to highest level. Be careful how the questions like these are asked. Another question could be written and asked to give it in the opposite order from most complex to least complex. The next question here is the spleen is an organ in the, and this one is asking what system it's found in. Is it the nervous system, the reproductive system, choice C, the lymphatic system, D, choice D, the endocrine system, or choice E, respiratory system. And then this next question here, which of the following body systems acts as a fast-acting control system for the body? Is it A, reproductive system, B, the nervous system, C, the endocrine system, D, the respiratory system, or E, the skeletal system? Section 3 of Chapter 1 covers the requirements for life. The learning outcomes for this section are to list the functional characteristics necessary to maintain life in humans. And the second objective is to list the survival needs of the body. So here's a list of the necessary functions. So what is necessary here? Humans and living things need to maintain boundaries. Movement is required. Responsiveness, digestion, metabolism, excretion, reproduction, and growth. So let's look at each of these individually and briefly. Maintaining boundaries is the first one here. That refers to separation between the internal and external environments, and that's a requirement. For example, the plasma membrane helps to separate cells from one another and their internal environment from their external environment. And then your outer covering, the skin, is going to separate you from the external environment outside. That can help provide protection from things getting in and from losing too much water. Then movement, and that involves the muscular system, right? To allow for that movement. The body parts are going to be moved by skeletal muscles. And then substances can be moved around with the help of muscles you're not in control with. For example, cardiac muscle helps to move blood through blood vessels as it pumps, as the heart pumps blood. And the smooth muscle is going to help move food through the digestive system and help you expel urine out of your urinary bladder. And then there's a term called contractility, which refers to movement at the cellular level. So within the cell, there is some contractility. For example, a skeletal muscle will shorten. Skeletal muscle cells will shorten, causing the entire muscle, which is the organ, to shorten. And then there's responsiveness. For responsiveness, there needs to be an ability to sense and respond to stimuli, and the stimuli can be from outside or inside. As well, your internal environment, any changes that go on within there. An example of responsiveness would be the withdrawal reflex, which helps prevent injury. For example, if you touch a really sharp object or a really hot object without even thinking, your body responds by pulling the body part away from the object that can cause injury. Another example of responsiveness would be the control of breath rate. And that can change in response to your activities. For example, if you begin to exercise, your body will respond to the changes in your blood chemistry as you exercise by increasing your breath rate. And then there's digestion. For digestion, you're going to break down ingested foodstuffs, and then you're going to absorb the simple molecules into the blood. So that's also a necessity. And then we have metabolism. And metabolism is a term for all the chemical reactions that occur in the body. Those that build up, which are referred to as catabolism, and those that break down, which is anabolism. So catabolic and anabolic metabolisms combined together refer to general metabolism. And then we have excretion. Excretion is a term used for the removal of wastes for metabolism and from digestion. For example, urea is a waste from breaking down proteins, and that has to be excreted with the help of the kidneys. Carbon dioxide is a result of oxidizing food to gain energy, and that has to be excreted mostly by your lungs. And feces is a waste product that needs to be excreted by your bowels, by your intestines, for any food that you didn't absorb. So that unabsorbed food is referred to as feces. Reproduction is also another necessary life function. And at the cellular level, reproduction involves the division of cells for growth and repair. The way we grow is by making more cells. And we're going to cover how cells divide in Chapter 3. And then at the organismal level, reproduction involves offspring, so producing offspring. And then growth is another one of the necessary life functions here. And in growth, you're going to increase in size of body parts as you grow. And when we look at humans, humans are multicellular organisms. And since we are multicellular, the individual cells have to be kept alive. So what helps keep all of your individual trillions of cells that make up your body alive? The organ systems. These organ systems are going to be designed, and the work that they do is going to help service every one of those cells. And all of the cells are going to depend on the organ systems to meet their survival needs. There are 11 organ systems, which we already went over, and they work together to help maintain life. And the diagram here on the right here is a simplified diagram that's going to show some of the relationships between some of the organ systems that help keep all of your cells alive. So let's kind of zoom in a little bit there. So there you have your digestive system represented, your cardiovascular, respiratory, urinary system, and integumentary system. It shows the relationships between them there. Your digestive system is going to take in food, digest it, and then eliminate waste out of the body. That's feces. Nutrients that are absorbed are going to be picked up by your cardiovascular system and circulated around to all your body, all the tissues of your body, including the tissues that make up the digestive system there. And as those nutrients are passed around, they're going to be delivered to the cells. And then the blood will also pick up waste products. Any waste product produced by tissues will be picked back up into the blood and also circulated around the body until they go to the organs that help excrete. So any metabolic waste can go to the kidneys and get filtered out, like nitrogenous waste will be filtered out there to create some of the components of the urine. Here at the respiratory system, the circulated blood will go there, and where we'll exchange carbon dioxide for oxygen. Carbon dioxide as a waste product will be eliminated out of the respiratory system, and then when we inhale, we'll take in oxygen that will be picked up and circulated around your body to your tissues. And then the integumentary system overall is going to be there to help protect the body as a whole from the external environment. So that's really simplified, showing just some of the systems and how they are connected to one another. So now we're going to look at the survival needs, and the survival needs here humans need several factors to survive that must be in appropriate amounts. Too much or too little can be harmful. It's possible to have too much oxygen. It's possible to have too much water. So here's the list, and we're going to go over these individually. Humans need to survive. They need nutrients, oxygen, they need water. They need to maintain a normal body temperature, and they need to be in a normal or appropriate, I should say, atmospheric pressure. So let's look at these individually. For nutrients, what are nutrients? These are chemicals for energy and for cell building. They include carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and minerals and vitamins. Carbs are a major energy source. Proteins are going to be used for as building blocks within cells, and also an important part of cell chemistry. Proteins serve as catalysts for your metabolism. And then fats, these are going to be long-term energy storage in there and within your body. And then minerals and vitamins, which are involved in chemical reactions as well as for structural purposes. For example, minerals like calcium to help provide some strength to your bones. And then oxygen. Oxygen is going to be needed in order to release energy from food. The reason we breathe in is so that we can unlock that energy. And so without oxygen, our body will only be able to survive for a few minutes. So it's very important to get that oxygen in. Water is important. It's the most abundant chemical in the body, and it also helps provide a watery environment needed for chemical reactions. Further, it's the base for water is the fluid base for many secretions and excretions, like when we excrete urine, and a lot of the other fluids like saliva that we produce in our mouth was going to be based on water. And then we need a normal body temperature. So we need to actually keep our body temperature within a certain range. In the Celsius scale, that's about 37 degrees Celsius, and Fahrenheit would be 98.6. But your body temperature needs to be kept within a range. If we go too low or too high, that can be dangerous, because that temperature, too extreme a temperature change in your body, can affect the rate at which chemical reactions take place. So maintaining normal body temperature is very important. And then appropriate atmospheric pressure is important. If we don't have the right amount of pressure, then we're not going to be able to exchange gases with the atmosphere correctly. We won't be able to get enough oxygen in. This is why when you go up a mountain, as you go up, the air becomes thinner and you're not going to have as much pressure, and you get to a certain point where you start getting altitude sickness because you're not able to get enough oxygen into your blood. So that concludes this section, and here's a couple of multiple choice questions for you to consider. Which of the following is not necessary for human life function? Is it A, excretion, B, intelligence, C, metabolism, D, movement, or E, responsiveness? Next question. The ability to sense changes in the environment and respond to them is a physiological ability known as, is it A, digestion, B, metabolism, C, responsiveness, or D, excretion? So now we're going to look at section 4 of chapter 1. This one is titled Homeostasis. And the learning outcomes for this section here are to define homeostasis and explain its significance, and describe how negative and positive feedback help maintain homeostasis, and then to describe the relationship between homeostatic imbalance, that's when things are not working right in your body, and how this homeostatic imbalance can lead to disease. So what is homeostasis? Homeostasis is the maintenance of a relatively stable internal conditions despite the continuous changes that occur in the environment. This is both in the external and internal environment. Your body has to work. All of the cells in your body and the organs are working to help maintain this homeostasis. It is not static. For example, body temperature needs to be maintained within a narrow range. But body temperature is never always the same temperature all the time, every day. It's dynamic. That means it goes through changes, but we're going to maintain a relatively stable conditions in there. So it's a dynamic state of equilibrium. The dynamic means there's changes occurring, but we're constantly making these adjustments to maintain things like body temperature. And this homeostasis is going to be the job of all of your organ systems. So your organ systems are working for that homeostasis. So for our homeostatic controls, your body must constantly be monitored and regulated in order to maintain homeostasis. And two systems that are working on this are the nervous and the endocrine systems, and other systems are going to help play a role in maintaining homeostasis. And the key thing we're looking at here are variables, which are the factors that can change. For example, your blood sugar changes throughout the day. After a meal, if you haven't had a meal in a while, the blood sugar levels are going to change and they need to be maintained. Body temperature, blood volume, and many other variables are constantly under monitoring, and your body is constantly working to maintain homeostatic control over these variables. Homeostatic control of variables is going to involve three components. One is the first component is a receptor, something to receive information, a control center to take that information, and then provide some sort of output that will go to an effector to help work on maintaining control of those variables. So let's look at defining these items or components. The first one is a receptor or a sensor, and the receptor is going to monitor the environment, and this is both external and internal. The receptor is going to respond to a stimulus or stimuli, which are things that can cause changes in your variables, like body temperature or blood sugar. Then we have a control center. The control center is going to determine the set point at which the variable is maintained. For example, a set range for body temperature. This control center will receive input from the receptor. So the receptor receives the stimulus and then sends information to your control center. And then the control center, once it receives it, will determine the appropriate response to take place. Once that appropriate response is determined, it'll be sent as information will be sent as output towards an effector. An effector is going to be structures that receive output from the control center, and the effector is going to provide the means to respond. And the response from the effector is either going to be to reduce the stimulus, and that's causing negative feedback. For example, if your body temperature is going too high, negative feedback would cause your body temperature to come back down. The same is true, or the opposite is true, your body is going too low. Negative feedback would cause your body temperature to go back up. And then there is the less common case where we're going to enhance the stimulus, and that is called positive feedback. So let's take a look at negative feedback first. Negative feedback is the most used feedback mechanism in the body. That's the most common. And the response is going to reduce or shut off your original stimulus. And this is going to cause the variable change to occur in the opposite direction. So again, if your blood sugar is going too high, negative feedback would cause your blood sugar to come back down. Opposite is true, your blood sugar is going too low, negative feedback would cause it to go back up. Some examples here I've already mentioned. One is regulating body temperature, and the nervous system is responsible for that. That involves the mechanism for controlling body temperature. And then regulating blood glucose is done so by a hormone called insulin, and this is an endocrine system mechanism. So looking at negative feedback for blood sugar here, there's going to be receptors that are going to sense an increase in blood glucose, for example, after a meal, and your intestines are absorbing sugar. Let's say you ate some bread or an ice cream. There's going to be receptor cells, special receptor cells that are going to pick or sense that there's a higher blood sugar. And the pancreas is basically the control center there. There's going to be special cells there that when they sense the blood sugar too high, those cells will secrete insulin into your blood, which is a hormone. And then that insulin is going to go to effectors, which are other cells, cells in muscle, cells in liver, and so on. You're going to tell those cells to absorb glucose from the blood and store it. So what effect does that have? That causes your levels of blood glucose to come back down. As the cells are taking in that sugar, they're taking it out of the blood. So that's an example of negative feedback. There's another hormone that's involved in this process, does the opposite. It's not mentioned here, but it's called glucagon. And so if you haven't had a meal in a while, your blood sugar level is dropping, glucagon has the opposite effect, telling those cells to, effector cells that took in the sugar, to now release it. Overall, this diagram you'll see regularly throughout the book as we consider homeostasis and the roles of certain organ systems in maintaining homeostasis for certain variables. So here we have an analogy here of a balancing beam on there, and the balancing beam, if an imbalance is created, your variable has either increased or decreased. In this case, stimulus is causing a change in that variable. The variable may increase, for example, and that's an imbalance. And the receptor detects this change, and then the information is going to be sent along what's called an afferent pathway, which will eventually go to some control center. And in that control center, remember, is where the decision is made on what to do about the stimulus causing the change in the variable. And then the control center will send information out through an efferent pathway, efferent as in exiting out of the control center. The information will be sent along that pathway to an effector. And then that effector is going to create some feedback to reduce the effect of the stimulus and return the variable back to normal homeostatic levels. And then we should see the balance beam in the analogy go back to normal levels for the variable. An example is given here in this diagram for body temperature as negative feedback, and it has above what happens when your body temperature goes too high, and in the bottom part of the diagram when your body temperature drops if it's cold outside, for example. So let me zoom in to this diagram here. And so let's say you're either doing exercise or you're out in the hot sun and your body temperature begins to rise. You're going to have receptors that are temperature sensitive in the skin and in the brain. So you're going to have sort of this thermometer or thermostat within the brain detecting your body temperature internally, and then your skin receptors, and they're going to send information by way of the nervous system, an afferent pathway to control center, which is the thermal regulatory center in the brain. So the brain detects this change in the stimulus and is detecting that body temperature is going too high. And so then the control center, thermoregulatory center, is going to send out information through the nervous system to effectors. In this case, effectors would include sweat glands. And so this would cause the sweat glands to begin to release sweat. And as that sweat evaporates off of your skin, you're going to release heat and your body's temperature will begin to drop back down to normal. And so you're now back at a more normal body temperature. It's for being cold here. If your body becomes too cold and you lose too much heat, your body temperature drops. Again, the receptors are going to sense this in the skin and in the brain. And they're going to send information by way of an afferent pathway to the thermoregulatory center in the brain. The brain makes some decisions about what to do about the information and then sends information out the efferent pathway to effectors. In this case, the effectors that are going to help bring your body temperature back up are skeletal muscles. So you begin to shiver unconsciously. So your muscles begin to contract rapidly, and those contracting muscles begin to create heat, and that helps bring your body temperature back up, and then we're back at balance. Notice that in both cases, a change in the temperature, that variable is occurring in one direction, and then the negative feedback sets a process in motion that causes that variable to come back in the other direction, in the negative direction, the opposite direction. That's why it's called negative feedback. In positive feedback, this is a less common situation here. In this case, we're going to amplify what the stimulus is causing, the changes that are occurring. So here the response enhances or exaggerates the original stimulus. And this may exhibit a cascade or amplifying effect as the feedback causes the variable to continue to move more and more in the same direction. And these types of positive feedback are usually going to control infrequent events that don't require conscious adjustment. For example, enhancement of labor contractions, and that's done by a hormone released in the brain called oxytocin in females. During labor, as the uterus contracts, it pushes on the fetus, and the fetus head pushes on the cervix, and then that sends information back to the brain to release more oxytocin, which is released through the blood, goes to the uterus, gets the uterus to contract more, and the frequency increases. So the time between contractions becomes shorter and shorter and shorter. So this is an example of positive feedback. Another example of positive feedback is when you break blood vessels and you need to form a clot to prevent further bleeding. So there, when platelets found in the blood are going to create this blood clot. This is diagrammed here for blood clotting when the blood vessel breaks. So let's say we initially break our blood vessel, and a break in the wall of the blood vessel occurs there, and that's going to create this positive feedback situation here. We do have red blood cells, white cells, but there are also small structures, fragments of cells really, that are called platelets. They have a special job. One of the special jobs they have is when there's a break in the blood vessel, those platelets are going to stick to the wall where the break has occurred. And when they stick to the wall, they're going to help be part of the formation of the blood clot. What they do when they do stick to the wall is they're going to release chemicals. These little green things represent, those little green spheres represent these chemicals being released. And those chemicals are going to attract more platelets to the area. And then those platelets stick. And then those sticking platelets are going to release more chemicals. So we're amplifying and causing more and more platelets to stick there. And this will continue until the break is entirely plugged up. Once it's plugged up, then we stop that positive feedback and things get back to normal. So what happens when we have an imbalance in homeostasis for any one of those variables? That can cause disease or illness. Okay, so any disturbances in that homeostasis. There's a big contribution to these types of changes in homeostatic imbalance with aging. Your organs and within your organ systems just don't function as efficiently as they used to. So it becomes harder and harder to maintain homeostasis. You become less efficient at this type of control, at homeostatic control. If any negative feedback mechanisms become overwhelmed, that can cause destructive positive feedback mechanisms to take over. An example would be like when heart begins to fail during heart failure. So this is the end of this section, and here's a multiple choice question to consider. It says, which choice below is not one of the three components of a homeostatic control system? Is it A, the control center, B, the receptor, C, the effector, or D, positive feedback? Next question, which of the following would be an example of positive feedback? Is it A, release of insulin to decrease high level of glucose in the blood? I would say no there, because I just gave that example, so I'll go ahead and help on that one. So is it B, release of glucagon to increase a lower than normal level of glucose in the blood? Is it C, shivering to generate heat in a situation where body temperature is below normal? Or is it D, the release of oxytocin to increase the strength of labor contractions? The next question, which of the following events is not the result of a negative feedback mechanism? Is it A, decreased urine production when blood pressure drops? Is it B, sweating to help lower elevated body temperature? Is it C, an increased respiratory rate when blood pH is elevated? Or D, blood clotting when the lining of the blood vessel is injured? So that's it for part 1 of chapter 1.